Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners. And that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.
Palpatine has suppressed everything so much because of his deep commitment to the dark side that he probably doesn't feel anything other than the joy of screwing over the Jedi.
Hello there. This is Dave, and you're listening to What Does Star Wars Mean to You, the show where we talk to all kinds of fans of Star Wars. From industry insiders to indie artists, from mega collectors to obsessive mythologists, to find out how Star Wars impacted their life. Here's the thing, there's a lot of ways to look at Star Wars, and it's all from a certain point of view, and that point of view is yours. Now, I've always loved hearing people's passionate points of view on Star Wars because, for me, it reveals new ways of looking at the franchise. Also, let's just face it, it's fun to talk Star Wars. Along the course of his professional life, my guest today has worn many hats. He has worked as an NHL sports journalist, a DJ, a musician, and an aerospace engineer. But he's always been a writer, and this has earned him the Goodreads Choice, the CALIBA Golden Poppy, and Compton Crook awards for his debut novel, Here and Now and Then. Say that 3 times real fast. His other novels include A Beginning at the End, We Could Be Heroes, Light Years from Home, Vampire Weekend, and he also contributed to the Star Wars From a Certain Point of View anthology, and of course is the New York Times bestselling author of Star Wars Brotherhood. Let's give a warm hello there to Mike Chen.
Hello there.
Hello there. Thank you so much for joining me, Mike. Tell me, are you ready to share with the world what Star Wars means to you?
Oh, yes. Star Wars means so much to me, and I have so much to say. And I will probably spend an hour talking about Anakin Skywalker. So
that's great. That's why we're here, to find out everything you love about Star Wars and why. I like to start with 5 with the Force, which is a standard set of 5 questions I ask all my guests. And so we'll just start off quick and easy. Which Star Wars movie is your go-to favorite?
So I always preface that there has to be a difference between best, favorite, and comfort watch. They're all different. I think hands down best is always The Empire Strikes Back. It is a flawless movie. Favorite maybe Revenge of the Sith. The thing that really gets me about Revenge of the Sith is you have the first 20 minutes or so, which is this giant big budget Clone Wars episode.
Yeah.
And then you have just the emotional high stakes of everything. I love the quiet moments in Revenge of the Sith. The opera scene is probably my favorite scene in all of Star Wars.
Yep.
It's just everything is just so high stakes and so emotional. And I think it has the best soundtrack of all the films, which is saying something.
It is.
And then comfort watch, I find myself turning on Rogue One a lot over the past few years. And I don't know, it's weird. I'm not quite sure why that as the one that I keep kind of putting on in the background, while I'm doing dishes or whatever. But those are my 3. So that I would say my top tier of Star Wars is those 3 plus The Last Jedi, and then everything kind of gets separated out into tiers. So I don't do a favorites list. I put them into groups because the actual order of those lists they switch around based on my mood.
Your list is more of a Venn diagram than a
yes
than a up and down list. Okay, for question number 2, I have to roll a 1d6 and got a 4. Who is your favorite droid?
Oh, it's got to be Chop. Chopper's always the best. Yeah. I was telling my wife because she hadn't seen Rebels fully. She'd only seen sporadic episodes with me before, but this is the first time that she's seen it from start to finish. And she's like, I see why you like Chopper so much.
Yeah.
Chopper's a total asshole on the side of good.
Question number 3. What is your favorite line to quote?
Oh, okay. I was thinking about this because I listened to the episode with Kelly, and it was like the one that I quote. It's like my subtle quote that no one knows that I'm doing Star Wars, but I say it all the time. And it is from Attack of the Clones, and it's when Anakin asks like, oh, and you can sense it too. This is there in like Padme's apartment, and Obi-Wan goes, possibly. It's kind of like a condescending possibly, and like I say that all the time with the intention of like, yes, I'm doing like my mullet Obi-Wan in my head.
That's amazing. And we're gonna have to talk about Obi-Wan's hair too. Now
Yeah,
that
that was a big plot point.
it was a big plot point. Can you do any Star Wars impressions or impersonations?
Oh no, no. It's funny because like I did theater in college, and I did theater locally for about 2 years after that. So you would think in theory that I could, but I no, I probably can't.
Well, besides the movies, what is your favorite Star Wars content? This could be a TV show, comic book, novel, game.
Mm, God, there's so much good stuff. I would say my underdog pick for this is any space combat video game. So starting with the X-wing, actually no, starting with the arcade, the Star Wars
Yeah.
vector-based arcade game. I loved that as a kid. So it's funny because it's like with Star Wars, like so much of what I adore the most is like right now, like probably for the past 30 years, is like I really love like the politics. I love lightsabers. I love the
Yeah.
mysticism of the Force. But as a kid, the thing that I loved the most was just an X-wing, like sitting in an X-wing. So when the PC game X-wing came out, it blew my mind because I had played Wing Commander the year before, and I was like, "Oh, this is so great! It's just I wish this was an X-wing." And then
Yes.
X-wing came out, and then so Star Wars Squadrons, especially on VR. My wife gave me a VR for our PlayStation specifically for Star Wars Squadrons as a Christmas present. It's like such a mind-blowing experience. It's so immersive and kind of nauseating, but that's okay. And so I would say, that I could name books, I could name like my TV shows or whatever, but like I'm going to go with that because I don't think that gets enough love. And I really
Yeah.
hope they come up with this follow up for Star Wars Squadrons.
Yeah. And now, speaking of VR, did you ever play the Oculus Darth Vader game?
Yeah, because that came out for PlayStation VR.
Oh, it
It
did.
was yeah, it was. I don't remember if I finished it because I think there are 5 episodes, but I remember the first time you actually see Vader, and so you have like the stormtroopers pointing their blasters at you, and Vader walks in, and like they made it so he's like just seems huge, and I remember thinking
Yes.
like this is kind of terrifying, and it's like
Yes.
it was so weird because like we see stormtroopers everywhere, like at cons and like in art and on toys. And like my daughter has a Vader plushie and things like that. And like these should not be intimidating characters, but in that context, it was almost shocking like at how scary it was. And that was really, really cool. And I think that only works in VR. Like if it was just on a
Yeah.
TV, like it would feel like you're watching a movie and it wouldn't be as immersive.
Yeah, you've got this feeling when he walks up to you of just continuously looking up, just like
Yes.
a Star Destroyer passes overhead.
Mhm.
It's just like this nonstop looking up at this dark figure that wants to kill you.
Yeah, it was very menacing. They did a really good job with
Yes.
that.
Now, I have so many questions for you about the book and then just about your Star Wars experience. I'm not 100% sure where to start. I'm going to go with my gut and start with your Star Wars experience.
Sure.
Just off the top, what was the first thing that introduced you to Star Wars, and can you walk me through that?
Um, it just existed in my life. So I was born in '78. I think it probably existed because my parents took my brother to because my brother is 1 year, 2 years older than me. So I don't think he was probably too young to see it in the theaters. Though they were running it in theaters like off and on for like I think 2 years, like in the old days. So he probably saw it in the theaters. He definitely saw Empire in the theaters, and we had toys. So one of my earliest memories is the Tauntaun, like the vinyl tauntaun with the slit in
Yep.
it, and then also like I think it came with the Hoth Rebel ion cannon, and like you pressed a little switch and it popped, like it got
Yeah.
like it blew up. So it's interesting, like thinking back now without home video or streaming, it was still in my mind through toys. I think
Mhm.
we had like the read along books. I saw Return of the Jedi in theaters. I definitely remember that. It's funny, so I was listening to Kelly Knox's episode. I'm going to plug Kelly Knox's conversation cards that I'm holding
Yes.
in my hand right
Oh,
here.
wow.
Come out in a few weeks. Um,
I may grab a screen grab of that just
that's
to
fine. I'm happy to plug Kelly as much as possible. She's awesome.
She is.
So I saw Return of the Jedi in the theater, and I remember most vividly the speeder bikes because of the sound. And then also when Vader's helmet is removed because that scared the crap out of me. And then we went to Kmart immediately afterwards, just to pick up stuff. And they had in their front display of their books, they had the Return of the Jedi storybook. And me and my brother were looking through it because we had just seen the movie. And we turned to the page where it's like helmetless Anakin. And I was like, oh God, and I slammed it right away. So it has always been present in my life. I had the Luke Skywalker like yellow lightsaber that slides out of his arm figure.
Oh, yeah.
I built my own Legos, like X-wings that always like fell apart. Like you would try to like split the wings, but there'd be too much weight, and so like the hinge would like naturally slide down. Um, the video games, like Super Star Wars was big. I had a Sega Genesis. My best friend had a Sega Genesis. We rented a Super Nintendo from Blockbuster specifically to play Super Star Wars. And then, X-Wing and those games. And like the Thrawn trilogy, like those books, when they came out, they were pretty big too. So it's like with my friend, we went to college together. And so when the special editions were announced, I remember it was freshman year. So they had just started re-merchandising stuff at that point, and he had
Yeah.
an old school like 90s Mac, and I had a PC. And so he had bought it was like Star Wars sound kit or whatever for the Mac. And so it was like at startup, it says like Red
Right.
5 standing by or whatever. But I believe we either came with or somehow we got like a digital version of the special edition trailer. And so like we would watch it over and over, and it was like tiny. It was like 320 by 240 resolution. Everything was pixelated. And our immediate neighbors in our dorm were like these two sorority girls who were just like, thought we were the biggest nerds, which is just funny. I think about that now because I bet wherever those two women are, they probably watch Mandalorian.
Yes.
I hope they think about us when they watch the Mandalorian. But it was cool because they're probably about like
They're probably like, remember those two nerds? Yeah. Hey, do you love Grogu? I do love Grogu.
exactly, yeah. New York Times best-selling author. There were like about 7 or 8 of the different people on my dorm floor that I'm still friends with most of them. And they were really into Star Wars too. So like we went to like the special editions together, and we went to the prequels or the Phantom Menace together. So I mean, I'm just going through like my life story through Star Wars. When my wife and I met on Match.com in 2002, and we met because of our mutual love of indie music, but also she was also a big nerd too. And so like on our first date, like she wore a Princess Leia t-shirt.
Oh,
And
wow.
I always point out that like in 2002,
Mhm.
merchandising was mostly like toys or kids t-shirts, and it was all centered around the prequels. And so for her to have a Leia t-shirt at that time was like you had to kind of like look for that, and like it
Yeah.
shows like a different level of like commitment to the nerddom. So
It does.
yeah, so like it just has been ever present in my life in like pretty much every way.
It sounds like it really has permeated your life. Is that the right
Yeah,
use?
permeated.
Permeated. Thank you.
Mhm.
And it's interesting when I have a theory that people born around the time you were, well, in the mid 80s kind of missed Star Wars altogether because they missed it in the past, and then they're a little too old for the prequels
Yeah.
when they come along. But you seem to be born right at that sweet spot where it's in your consciousness and you're still kind of young enough to really enjoy the prequel trilogy. Did you have, I mean, the prequel trilogy tends to have a negative reaction from people. And I think that's an oversimplification.
I think there's a generational divide.
I think
for
that's it.
that.
It's a generational divide.
And it's funny. It's like I'm seeing that with Star Trek right now too,
Oh,
because
really?
it's like I remember because my dad was an original series fan, and so he watched Next Generation, but he didn't really like it that much. And like I love Next Generation. I
Yeah.
love DS9. And my wife grew up. She was a Next Generation and a Voyager fan. And then eventually we showed each other, like I showed her DS9, she showed me Voyager, and we both really loved that. But we both don't really like the original series that much.
Yeah.
And now it's interesting seeing like there's a generation of fans who are like 90s Trek fans who like refuse to accept like Discovery and Strange New Worlds and things like that. And then you have also fans who are coming in through Discovery and
Yeah.
they're like, where do I go now? And I'm like, you should watch Deep Space Nine now.
Yes.
So much of this is just like, and I'm going to jump fandoms again. It's like the Doctor Who thing. Like your favorite Doctor is the first Doctor you usually meet, and it's kind of like that. So I feel like with Star Wars, I never gave into the prequel hate. I always acknowledged there's some technical like flaws in like performance and direction and editing. I think particularly with Attack of the Clones. I don't say anything bad about Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith is a freaking awesome movie, but I feel like if you wanted the original trilogy and then you saw the Phantom Menace after like the glow of like Duel of the Fates wears off, you're kind of like, what was that? And it's interesting. I just had this epiphany because we showed our daughter Star Wars. She's almost 9 now, and we showed it to her when we showed her. I think she was 5.5. It was over the course of a year, and we did 4, 5, 1, 2, Clone Wars 3, 6. So it was like his augmented version of the Machete Order. And like the
Yes.
whole point of it was to really get her like emotionally invested in the character of Anakin / Vader. And it really, really worked. And she sees it all as like this cohesive thing. And so a few weeks ago, because she watched Clone Wars and then she went on to Mandalorian. And then during this last Mandalorian break, we were like, okay, let's get ready for Ahsoka. You should watch Rebels. So that's where we're at right now. So she hasn't revisited the movies in quite a while. And she kind of gets like the timelines jumbled up because it's a lot.
Yeah.
So we rewatched The Phantom Menace about a month ago, and I'm watching with her, and it's like so interesting how like in the opening scene, on the Trade Federation ship, like the droidekas roll out, and she's like, "Those are my favorite." And I'm like, "Yeah, they are. They're pretty awesome." And I've always looked at them as like I remember when they first came out, and I'm watching the Phantom Menace on its premiere, and I'm like, "What the hell are those things?" I
Yeah.
was not prepared for it. And like the battle droids, they're so starkly different from the stormtroopers. But then with her, it's like the first time the battle droids come on screen, she goes like, "Roger, Roger." It's like it's just part of Star Wars for her. And so I think like, whatever is like the upcoming and new media for you after a certain age, there's always going to be a little bit of like an emotional divide with that.
Yeah.
And like then you're just going to keep seeing that repeated over and over and over in any fandom that you see.
I think you bring up a really good point that that it's like Doctor Who in that the first one you meet is kind of your version of it. And also it's really impressive, methodical way of introducing Star Wars to your daughter. I think that's really, really cool that you went through the viewing of watching it in machete order and including Clone Wars in that.
Yeah,
Which
I
is
thought about it a
fantastic.
lot.
Yeah.
So there's if you look up on Nerdist, you can Google like Nerdist Mike Chen Star Wars for this. Like I wrote an essay kind of recapping the experience for them. So what we did, we introduced her to characters through books. And we were careful, like even if we were reading like Star Wars ABCs or whatever, like anything that hinted at Vader is Anakin, like we skipped it. Like we were very, very careful to protect that. And then we used the Forces of Destiny short cartoons to like just kind of introduce her to the world. There were a few select Clone Wars episodes before we really dove in. I think like the one on with the Gathering on Ilum, where the kids are like building their lightsabers with Hu Yang, like things like that, where it's like very gentle introductions into the
Hmm.
universe, and then we were like, okay, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna do this. So it was a very methodical approach to it.
That's great. And is she a big Star Wars fan now?
I would say so. I mean, like, it's really cool how like her fandoms. She loves Star Wars. She's recently gotten into D&D because my wife is a big D&D and Elder
Oh,
Scrolls
wow.
person.
Yep.
And so like she has seen my wife play Elder Scrolls, and we talk about kind of like the fantasy lore of D&D. But it was the Honor Among Thieves movie. Like we've seen it like probably like 7 or 8 times now.
Yeah.
um and it's a great movie, and Chris Pine and Michelle Rodriguez, like they're just
Yeah.
so great in that movie, and she really just hooked onto that. And there are these tie-in audiobooks that she just listens to over and over, like while she's just doing stuff. So it's like we're trying to expand her. We introduce her to a fandom, and then we just let her decide, like, do you want more of this? Like, what we're trying to do is teach her that, like, you can work your way into these worlds, and you can absorb everything, and you can like live creatively through the content. Like, you can make art, you can tell stories and all this stuff, and it's okay to be like a big fan of that, because I think like so much of our popular culture is still surrounded on like the only thing you can be a fan of is sports. So like we're really trying to like like show her the joy in this and the creativity.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love it.
Cinema Craptaculous is your podcast destination for all things movies, good and bad, streaming series, good and bad, and pop culture, good, bad, and the ugly. You get a totally different show every week, such as People Also Watched with Adam, Dave, and Tara. They're three industry insiders who always find the hilarity in the big budget feature and the lesser known feature you may have missed. There is, of course, the Expanded Universe. This is your place to geek out. John, Doc, and S'more are your geek experts to talk about what's going on in the world of streaming series, movies, superheroes, pretty much any showbiz geek topic, they're going to talk about it. And of course, there's the show that started it all, Cinema Craptaculous, with Stephanie, John, and Dave. You don't even need to have seen the movies these guys talk about to have a good time. So what are you waiting for? Go and subscribe to Cinema Craptaculous wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.
When you were a kid, I know you bought some of the toys, but what were some of your favorite collectibles? Even as an adult, what are some of your favorite collectibles?
My like holy grail toy when I was a kid was getting the X-Wing toy, the ones that like about a foot long. And when they did the re-releases in the 90s, like that was the first thing that I bought. And the difference between the early 80s version and the 90s version is that like the plastic has like some paint on it to make it look a little bit, it's more battle damaged and like just worn. We got a bag of stuff from my parents' house a few months ago, and it actually has my X-Wing in it. I would say like that. And I remember when like the first master replica lightsabers came out. This was like the
Oh,
early
yeah.
2000s. I mean, like you can get lightsabers anywhere now that are high quality. But back then it was like, this is expensive. This is going to cost you like $200, and like the way that it lit up was just like mind blowing at the time. I would say like, I remember like my wife got me the Vader red one, and I think it's the Luke A New Hope one. And I remember like she's coming home from work, and like I was in the bathroom with the lights off with both lightsabers, and I was just like waving them around. And she comes in, she's like, "Do I need to leave you alone?" I'm like, "Yeah, sorry about that." But yeah, those are probably like my favorite ones. And like I'm not too much of a collectible person, like just because I don't like clutter. Um,
Yeah.
so like I have a few Funko Pops, but it's usually my wife giving me those. Like I'm much bigger like I like video game experiences, like because feel like it's much more of like an experience rather than just like this thing on the wall.
So have you played Jedi Survivor?
Not yet. I haven't had time for that.
Yeah.
My backlog of video games is so big. I did play Fallen Order.
Mhm.
I'm replaying Knights of the Old Republic right now. I'm about an hour and a half into that, and it's because it's on the Nintendo Switch, which
Yes.
makes it very easily accessible.
Yes.
And so like if my wife is playing Elder Scrolls or Zelda at night, then I will use the other Nintendo Switch and just play Knights of the Old Republic.
Hey, I just wanted to interrupt real quick to let you know that the following has spoilers for Mike Chen's book, Brotherhood. We talk about it for about 45 minutes, so if you want to skip ahead, feel free to. And now let's go back to talking Star Wars. I want to switch over to the book a little bit, but
Sure.
we're going to really still talk about your thoughts about Star Wars. In your acknowledgement section of Brotherhood, you say that your pie-in-the-sky dream job would be to write a Star Wars novel, and you told that to your manager when he asked you.
Yeah.
And you qualified that and said, especially in the prequel era.
Yeah.
And what is it about the prequel era that particularly drew you?
I've tried to figure this out because I grew up obviously with the original trilogy, and like I lived through like the fandom backlash of the prequels, and I just never felt that.
Yeah.
And so like I would find myself like quietly defending them or just like ignoring conversations about that. I think one of the biggest things that really draws me to it is the gray morality of the politics of that
Yeah.
era. And especially like when it was like 99 through 2005, like we didn't know how it was going to end. We didn't know how each theme was going to come out. And so I remember like how jarring it was to see like how pristine and beautiful
Yes.
Naboo was compared to like the junk worlds that you see in the original trilogy. And I think now that we have lived through those three movies and you see like the gradual decay of things as the Republic loses its grip on society, like even more so now I really appreciate like the politics of that era. And so like
Yes.
I in terms of space battles, like I definitely prefer like the original trilogy. We got to the episode of Rebels where Hera flies an X-wing and she's like leading the assault to defend Lothal, and I'm like, this is so awesome. It's like
Yes.
because Hera's always flying the Ghost, and like Hera's in an X-wing. This is so great. But in terms of like the character and the world building and everything, I love how like everything is just kind of murky in the prequel
Yeah.
era, and I think like between that and the idea that like the Jedi are fallible, I find that really, really interesting. So like I had told my agent I would really love to write a prequel era story. And in my head it was like I would like to write either Qui-Gon and Dooku, which Kevin Scott did, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, which Claudia Gray did, or
Yep.
Qui-Gon or Anakin and Obi-Wan. And so I managed to snag that one.
Now, in the process of pitching ideas or getting hired on to write this novel, was it presented to you like, hey, we have this area for you to kind of play in? This is like Anakin and Obi-Wan as almost like a post Attack of the Clones, pre-Clone Wars story? Or do you just kind of get a little bit of like, are you able to go in and say, hey, I've got an idea for this?
No, they tell you what they want.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of latitude with it. So they told me they wanted it to be Anakin and Obi-Wan. It had to be a bridge novel between Attack of the Clones and Clone Wars. And they said they wanted to cover, the line like that business on Cato Nemoidia. And they said like,
Yeah.
but you can pitch like whatever that business is, like you can pitch it. And my editor said that his personal request was that he would like to give the Nemoidians some dimension, and he also wanted to see if I could make a badass Nemoidian hero. So with all of that, so we got the call for that, and I remember my agent said like, "Oh, we'll set up a call with the Del Rey team in like a week, and you can just kind of talk through this with them." And in that week, I came up with the pitch that basically became Brotherhood. I read it out, I kind of like performed it to them over Zoom as I was like telling this whole story. The only thing that was missing from that was there was no central antagonist yet. It was just kind of like the system is failing type of thing. And so after Lucasfilm bought off on the general premise, my editor said, "Do you want to use Ventress as a villain?" And I'm like, "I can do that."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, you can use anyone. You just have to ask." And they might not say yes. And I told him, and this Alex Davis over at Del Rey, he's really great. And he's also a big Deep Space Nine fan too. But he said, that with Ventress, like she hadn't had a proper introduction like
Yes.
to like a start point yet. So he's like, you can pitch it. They may not say yes, but she seems to really fit here. And so we went with that at first, and like I actually didn't have a backup plan in case that failed. I guess I would have had to made like generic, like antagonist, but they let me use Ventress too. So that was like the biggest change from the original pitch, was actually just adding her in and then allowing that to grow.
Yeah, when you agreed to do the interview, I was like, okay, I have to read this book. So I went and bought the book. And typically, before I buy a book, I'll read the back jacket cover, I'll read the front, I'll like flip through it. This time, I just picked it up and started reading. So when we got to, I don't know, maybe page 50 when Ventress is introduced, I was like, oh wow, this has her. This is
Oh, that's
great.
awesome. You went
no
to it totally cold, because
Totally
Ventress was part of the early marketing. Like one of the, I believe she's mentioned in the back cover copy,
Yes,
and she was in one of the early chapters that was released. So that's pretty cool that you didn't know that she was in there.
Yeah, it was a few times where I was just taken completely off guard and loved it, and was like so thankful that I didn't do like more research and just to what the book was. And it's funny you mentioned her introduction, because that's the other thing I learned in the past week or two, just completely differently, that Tartakovsky's Clone Wars originally introduced Ventress, and that was kind of taken out of the canon. And now you have the canon of introducing her, which is, I think, really kind of awesome. Are there any other things you introduced to canon that you're particularly proud of or thought was particularly cool?
Well, so first with the Genndy animated series, I know there's people have noticed that I've tried to, I guess, recanonize different events from there. So for the record, Mace Windu on Dantooine, that's in there. Ki-Adi-Mundi leading or surviving the first attack by General Grievous, that's in there. And then I try to write Anakin and Ventress on Yavin still exists the way that I wrote it. So Anakin says Dooku's agents have tried to kill me before. So that's reference one. He also recognizes her fanship.
Yes.
And then Ventress says something like, I'm aware of you, or like or Dooku will be interested in your progress, something like that. So the way that there was originally, I think, one or two more lines that were really, really specific about Yavin, and we cut it because it'd be like, if you don't know what this is going to be really confusing. It's going to take you out of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I treated Genndy, and I pitched this, and no one told me no, so I ran with it. Is that Genndy? Because when you watch Genndy, it's so different from everything else. And the force power usage in there is so overpowered that it does not line up with what you see in Clone Wars or the movies or the TV shows. So I pitched it as Genndy is propaganda on the HoloNet.
Yeah.
We're showing you how awesome our Grand Army of the Republic is, and look at all this stuff that they do. So they take these moments where Mace Windu took down a battalion of super battle droids. Okay, but what if he did this, and we're going to portray it this way, and just make him seem like the most badass warrior ever. So what we know is that one of Dooku's agents, likely Ventress, tried to take down Anakin on Yavin 4. It was dark, it was rainy, it was quick. Anakin did not actually get to see who this person was, but Anakin also recognizes the fanship. And so when Obi-Wan rescues Anakin at the end, and they're talking very, very briefly, Anakin's about saying something and he's about to say I think I've seen her before, and Obi-Wan cuts him off, or they get a transmission or something, and that was very intentional. Everything kind of lines up to that. So that was really intentional to keep that alive, because I really love that, but it also it's stylistically doesn't really fit in with Star Wars. So it's how do you make it fit in with that? So now they all exist. And I totally have deviated from your original question. What was it?
What additional things in the books that you added to the canon of Star Wars are you particularly happy about or proud of? And I think that's one great one.
The two things that were really conscious choices to bring things back in the John Jackson Miller Kenobi novel is where it's acknowledged that Satine is the one who gave Obi-Wan the Ben name. And so I tried to say that it very explicitly, like Dex makes fun of Obi-Wan for that. And so that kind of brings that back in. And then Matthew Stover's Revenge of the Sith novel, which is like by far, I think, like the best novel in Star Wars, just because of the way that it's written. The myth of the Sun Dragon, I really go into it here, and I'm just building off everything that Stover did here in his book. So those are like the legends things that I tried to bring back in. For me personally, I was really happy that like a lot of people have responded to what I brought into like the Nemoidian culture, and for me it was like all of my storytelling is like political, whether it's subtly political or overtly political. Um, and this was I was writing this at a time that like anti-Asian hate crimes were kind of like at a peak in like
Yeah.
2021. And so when they asked me to give dimension to the Nemoidians, it felt like really easy to kind of like put this allegory in there, and also to use it as like, you know, one of the things that we're really gripping with as a society over the past 10 years is like, how do people get radicalized? And it's usually a combination of like they don't feel empathy from either the system or from other people around them. They feel forgotten, and then they're getting kind of fed like propaganda, and like no one is there to like to pull them out of it. And in a way, that's what happens to Anakin.
Yeah.
But it was important. I wanted to kind of ground that into Star Wars with like, you know, we talked about the bombing on Cato Nemoidia. Like my editor said, like, oh, this is kind of like their 9/11 moment. I'm like, yeah, that's what it is. It's like the moment that like, you know, it's so catastrophic for their society that it's like it's going to splinter the different ideologies that of their culture. So it was really important to like be able to do that in a thoughtful way, and that was really well received.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is like people really love Mill Alabeth, which I'm really grateful for, because I thought everyone would hate her, because it's like I wanted to present like this protagonist who is just defies all of the Jedi tropes. Because what was really interesting looking at this point in time of like this is right after Geonosis, and everyone's like rushing into the war, and to build a bridge between Attack of the Clones and Clone Wars. In Clone Wars, like, you know, they're totally synced up with their clone battalions, and like Obi-Wan and Anakin are like buddy buddy, and it's like, well, how did they get it there? Because that's only like, you know, 4 to 6 months have passed. And so I wanted Mill to like kind of be the point of view of like, you know, the dissenter, like the pacifist dissenter who is like, why are we doing this? Like this makes no sense at all. Because that's one of the best questions I think about the prequel era, and is like, why are they just going along with these clones? And I think the answer is like, because no one asked. Like they just did it.
Yeah, they almost felt like they had to.
Yeah. It was really important to show that the like Palpatine is manipulating things so quickly that they have no choice to do it. Because if they say like, wait, let's take a step back and figure out what's actually happening with these clones, Palpatine just creates another catastrophe that forces them to go. So like that, I wanted to kind of to show that, but then to have someone who was innocent enough to be like, this isn't right. We shouldn't be doing this. So I'm really happy that people like. There's been so much fan art, which is really cool, but also like people saying like, are there any more stories with Mill? And so if you look at Star Wars Adventures, it's the comic series that's kind of like a family comic series. Issue number 5, I believe, by Amanda Dibert, who is a friend. So Amanda dropped Mill's name in the sequel era. So it's Mill and her friend Vivert, who Vivert is her friend who helps her when she doesn't feel good in Brotherhood. So there's a reference in Amanda's comic in the sequel era that Mill and Vivert are bounty hunters in there. And so my headcanon is that after Order 66, Mill and Vivert, because they're probably 16, 17 years old at that point, they're basically like they find their footing, like they just try to survive, but then they find their footing as kind of like Doctors Without Borders types of
Yeah.
people, like where they're just trying to help people under the disguise of like bounty hunters. So they use like their network of information to like figure out where people need help, and they just show up and do it. But then they'll still collect easy bounties, for
Yeah.
money. So yeah, they got a name drop in the sequel era, so they live.
They're still there. That's
Yeah.
great. One of the things, going back to the idea of the Jedi running the soldiers, I really liked in Brotherhood how Anakin kept kind of saying to himself, I'm making these orders and I'm not being questioned, and the clones are just doing it, and
Yeah.
it's really effective. And it's such a great kind of omen of what's to
Mhm.
come.
Yeah, that was intentional. And he's so used to just headbutting with
Yes.
everyone. And I think like one of my main goals with this book was to like at the very least, I wanted you to develop a lot of empathy and sympathy for Anakin, if not like just really like him. I really like him. I think he's like a really complex character who's put in constantly terrible situations, and the support system that he needs was never given to him other than like by Palpatine whispering in his ear,
Yeah.
saying like, hey, these people that like are trying to talk you down, don't listen to them. Why would you listen to them when they're always telling you no? So like it was really important to show, like there's a really great line in Stover's Revenge of the Sith novel where when Palpatine tells him do it to kill Count Dooku, and where Stover writes, I'm paraphrasing, like it gave Anakin what he was been waiting for his entire life, permission. And that is discussed a lot in different ways. What Obi-Wan is thinking about Anakin, what Anakin's thinking about himself, what Obi-Wan is thinking about like with Satine. And the idea with the clones is that like he's just surprised that it's like no one has to give him permission to do this. There's a chain of command and he can just do it. And he kind of like realizes the effectiveness of that. Now, in the context of a military, that's okay because there's a chain of command, but it kind of feeds into like as Anakin struggles more and more with like the war effort is doing badly. Ahsoka leaves the Jedi Order. Like, what is happening? Oh no, Padme's gonna die, and no one's listening to me. And he's like, I can do something about this if you just let me. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to like really kind of allude to like his first introduction to that kind of power. And it's one of those things where if there was a proper support system, like emotionally and functionally too, like that really wouldn't have happened. Like you can let Anakin talk about it. And I really wanted to show that like Obi-Wan in his heart knows that Anakin has things that he needs to talk about. But
Yeah.
because Obi-Wan has been very understandably so, but has been like indoctrinated by the Jedi way the entire time, like he can't bring himself to do that. So it's like, and he's just not built for that. He does not have the capacity to do that, and that's not really his fault, but he at least senses that Anakin needs that.
And he's also kind of dealing with his own understanding of what the Jedi Order is, what his
Yes.
relationship with Satine is, what that means in relationship to his judgment of Anakin's relationship with Padme. It's really kind of, it's a fascinating jumble of emotions
Yeah.
and experience coming together, trying to figure everything out. And
That
provides,
was the so everyone, when you're hired to write a Star Wars book, like they pick you for a reason. And so they picked me for this one because they knew they wanted a very character focused book. They wanted it to be like really tight points of view to
Mhm.
so we could really get into the heads of these characters, because it's like if this was a Clone Wars episode, it would have happened and then basically been resolved in like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But what was important here is not so much like the mechanics of the bombing and the trial and the escape. Like that's important because it accelerates the war on a practical level. But what's really important about this story is seeing how these events create this bridge for these two men, emotionally, taking them from Attack of the Clones into the Clone Wars, and
Yeah.
not just their own bond, but also like the things that they're dealing with like internally. Like for Anakin in particular, because he's got Padme, he's got a new arm, he's got a new title, and no one to talk to about that.
Yeah. Um, The arm thing was fantastic. It's like, because it is that you treat it as something he has to get used to that he's not quite in sync with yet, and is always lagging. It's like playing a video game and you like hit up and it takes a second for up to go up.
Yeah, it was. So there were two things with that. I think, like, for most people in the Star Wars universe, they have this medical technology where they can give you basically a replacement limb, and you've got nerves and feeling and strength and things like that. And for like 99.9% of people, it's like it's no big deal because I can still drive my speeder, I can still like cook dinner or whatever. For Anakin, where like precision and speed and power is so important to him, like he feels off. And my wife has some medical issues, and we often talk about like disability representation in media. And she's like, it's always presented as like it's the worst thing ever, like that someone got got injured and is in a wheelchair, and it's like this horrifying moment in a show. Or it's just treated like oh yeah, they're totally cool with it, and it's like it's no big deal. And she's like, no, it's like it's really more about like we need to show that people, once you stop fighting it and you start accepting like this is part of your ability to live every day, then you can like just kind of adapt to it. So instead of like trying to force it into your life, you just go with it. And that, so we talked about that a lot with Anakin, and that kind of made it into like this, in terms of like it's heightened because Anakin is fighting with it, and is also like how he uses the Force and how he senses the Force, all these factors that we don't think about in the real world, but I was able to kind of like just infuse that with him. So it was really good that in some of the reader feedback, like some people in the disability community like read that and acknowledged that they felt seen with that. So that was really important.
And one of the things I noticed is in reading Disturbance, which is part of Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view, it's essentially the Emperor just before he makes the phone call to Darth Vader.
Yeah, their Zoom call.
The Zoom call to Darth Vader, say, hey, I felt a disturbance in the Force. It's this dude Skywalker, and I think we should turn him.
Yeah.
And in that story, the Emperor kind of references pushing down his emotions or not feeling his emotions, and that kind of gives him strength.
Yeah.
And then Anakin within Brotherhood is very much like, my emotions are what drives me, and it fuels my use of the Force a little bit. And if I'm getting this wrong, please correct me.
No, that's totally right. Anakin is super emo.
It's super emo, exactly. And then Windu, I would say it probably like Anakin, you're in this emotions too much. You need to quell them. So that makes Windu and the Emperor kind of like different sides of the same coin. And
I would say like the Emperor preys on emotions. Like I would say like Palpatine is probably like any emotions, and this is like speculation from me at this point.
Yeah.
But like I would say like Palpatine has suppressed everything so much because of his deep commitment to the dark side that like he probably doesn't feel anything other than like the joy of screwing over the Jedi. It's like, there was this really great quote from Sam Witwer where he was talking about Revenge of the Sith, and he's like, how Palpatine is like cackling when he's throwing the Senate pods at Yoda, and he's like, think about this thing that like you have been planning for like 30 years, and then it is finally happening, and is happening better than you could possibly imagine. Of course you would be cackling as you throw Senate pods at like your main adversary. But no, I think like Palpatine, he preys on emotions. He uses them as a weapon. The Jedi, like in their doctrine, and like I've read very little of the High Republic, but as I understand it, like the High Republic kind of goes into this a little bit more, and the difference between the High Republic Jedi and our Republic Jedi is pretty stark in how they handle emotions. And in the time of the prequel era, the Jedi are like, so while Palpatine is like using them as a weapon, like the Jedi are kind of like, just let them all go, ignore all of them. And I think it's like, I remember someone was complaining to me about like you're kind of slandering the Jedi that way as being like emotionless monks, and I'm like, but no, that's exactly what George Lucas has been saying.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a bigger metaphor for being like static, like keeping like a system static rather than like constantly evolving. And the, Lucas always talks about like his, like that's how governments fall. Like that's how you hand a government over, is like when you don't keep becoming progressive and inclusive and evolving your rules and your laws and things like that. The thing with Mace and Anakin in this book is everyone has to remember that this is like Anakin's point of view. So
Yeah.
Anakin naturally feels antagonistic towards Mace. Like this is planted all the way back in the Phantom Menace. Like when like they look at each other and like there's clear disdain for them
Yeah.
there, and it's like, it grows in each movie. But it's not because Mace is a bad person at all. And Mace is like the best warrior on the Jedi and like the most insightful. But all of the Jedi really lack kind of like the empathy, like the human empathy that like we need to survive. And so if you've plucked a kid out at, like, my daughter is 9 years old or is just about to turn 9, and so she is approaching the Phantom Menace age of Anakin. And I think about, like, if you are taking a kid like this and removing them from the people that love them and everything that they've known and thrown into like this world of like superpowered emotionless monks who have to follow really strict rules and regulations, like of course they're going to be messed up. And I think that was one of the points that I remember George Lucas said around the Phantom Menace. He said that like he understood criticism that like they wanted Anakin to be like a teenager at that point, or either like a teenager or a baby, like one or the other. And they're like, no, the point where the most emotional damage would come from like removing them from their family is about like 8 to 9 years old, because they understand the world and they have rooted their connections emotionally, and then you rip that all away from them. So it's not Yoda's fault, it's not Mace's fault, it's the institution failing to adapt, and that's like no single person could change that. It has to be like a institutional change, which is again another metaphor for politics.
Yeah, well, it is. The politics of it is all mixed in together in the what do you call in the the text of how they should act.
Yes, yeah, the doctrine of the Jedi.
The doctrine. Thank you.
I think like it was interesting seeing some reader feedback where they were upset with how I portrayed the Jedi. And this is far minority. And I feel like if you're upset with how I portrayed the Jedi, then you're missing the entire point of the prequel trilogy and the Clone Wars. And the idea is like it's okay to separate. I feel like people who feel that way cannot separate the belief system and the ideals of the Jedi, which are very, very well and good, and then the way that the institution itself is run.
Exactly.
Like, I am not a religious person at all, but I feel like you could read your religious texts and feel one way about them, as like this is like a grounding guide for how I want to view my life, versus like organized religion, which I don't think there's an example of it not causing a problem in our world.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that, where it's like to separate the Jedi as an institution versus the Jedi as a belief system. Like they are two completely different things, and it's okay for one of them to still be the ideal while the other one is failing to adapt. And you have like the most evil dude in the galaxy, like exploiting all of those cracks.
Exactly. And it's really kind of impressive how you bring that all together within Brotherhood and kind of hit from all of those different points of view of Mace. Well, Mace as seen by Anakin, but definitely Anakin's POV, Ben's POV, even Ben's POV of Qui-Gon in the realization that maybe the Jedi are not completely perfect in their institution.
Yeah, one of the things I get asked about quite a bit is that do I think like that Anakin would have turned out okay if Qui-Gon was his master? And I keep going back to like I don't think Anakin would have been okay as long as Palpatine lived.
Yes.
Because I think like if Qui-Gon was there, Palpatine would have picked it up right away and found a way to kill him. Because if you look at all through Clone Wars leading up to Revenge of the Sith, Palpatine the entire time is just trying to separate Anakin from his support system, which is what abusers do. And so if he had identified Qui-Gon as like this empathetic father figure that Anakin really needs, he'd find a way to kill him like right away. So as
And
long as Palpatine exists, then Anakin's going to turn.
and in the most traumatic way as
Yes,
well.
exactly. Yeah.
No, Palpatine has that characteristic that I admire so much in people, in that he can take any loss and turn it into a win.
Yes.
I think
Not good
maybe
for
there's
evil people, but good for positive people.
yeah, exactly.
There, I'm quoting Sam Witwer again, where he said he was talking about Palpatine, and he said like Palpatine's best trait or most successful trait is his ability to adapt.
Yes.
I think it was when he was talking about Darth Maul, like when Maul came back, and like when they were writing Maul in the Clone Wars, that like he was supposed to be the Clone War general, not Dooku, and so like talking about like how Palpatine adapted to the loss of Maul by immediately recruiting Dooku. Like he's like, "Oh, you don't feel good about the Republic? Look, let's see what we can do about it. And you want to be a
Yeah.
Sith Lord too? Cool." But yeah, that's probably like the way that Palpatine. It's like every single thing that Palpatine says in Star Wars, and I wrote him this way too, is like it has a very specific purpose. So if you look at
Yes.
Palpatine's conversation when they're talking to the Nemoidians, like everything in there is like trying to nudge things in a certain way. His conversation with Anakin in particular, like every single line in there is designed to drive Anakin over the edge. And then with the at the very end, it's supposed to be as close to a reveal as an explicit reveal as possible, because it's like we never specifically say like, yes, Darth Sidious is behind the bombings. Like, and there have been some readers who are like, who liked it, kept kind of nebulous, and some others who like wish that there was like a specific Darth Sidious chapter. And we actually debated doing that, but we decided to like his speech probably inferred enough, but like his speech about like, oh, this bombing was so bad that it shows us we got to get those Jedi in there. Like
Yes.
they've got to be part of this chain of command now. Like we're even giving them armor, like
We're
so that they
we're
could fight
officially
better.
giving them the title of generals.
Yeah. So the idea is like if you take every single line that Palpatine says, like it is designed to either push Anakin over the edge or push the Jedi further into vulnerability so that they could just be killed.
The Emperor is one of my favorite characters because of Ian McDiarmid and his delivery of those lines.
That's why the opera scene in Revenge of the Sith is so amazing.
Just a little uptick of his lips, just a sly look.
I was rewatching the scene in Revenge of the Sith the other day where Anakin realizes that Palpatine is the Sith Lord, and you watch Ian McDiarmid, like his body language changes in like every 5 seconds, and it's all manipulation for Anakin. It's like a masterclass for anyone who wants to learn acting.
One of the things that I really appreciated in Brotherhood is the voices, because they all sounded like Ewan McGregor could portray this Obi-Wan, or the Clone Wars Obi-Wan could portray this Obi-Wan.
James Arnold Taylor, yeah.
Every character leapt off the page sounding just like the rest of the Star Wars universe.
That's good. That was very intentional. With the idea for Anakin in particular, that he starts off more as Hayden. There's a transition point around the middle where he starts to bridge into Matt Lanter, and then by the end he is much more Matt Lanter. And the point that I make to readers too is that if you take Matt Lanter's Anakin and you compare him to Hayden at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, they're basically the same. Like that's sort of like buddy comedy type of thing with Obi-Wan. It's very much riffing off that. So then the goal is not so much like that feels pretty unified, but then the bigger part is where does Hayden's Anakin start at Attack of the Clones? And part of that is I rewatched Attack of the Clones probably like 5 times, like to prep for this, and it was noticing who Anakin, or when Hayden's portraying Anakin, is like when is he monotone and kind of submissive, and then when is he natural in himself? And it's like it's 2 things. It's when he's with Padme after they get to Naboo. It's like she has to like let her guard down first, and then he lets his guard down, and then he sounds like a normal human. And then it's also when he is very emotional. So taking that, it's easy to write Anakin as like stoic Hayden, because I just put him in like whenever he's in a position around other Jedi who are his seniors,
Yep.
it's like okay, and I tried to really acknowledge that because I think like even though Hayden and George Lucas like talked about that like around the Attack of the Clones press time, it's like it seems to be a point that's lost on a lot of people. But it's like once you see that, once you realize that like he's intentionally trying to be stiff and monotone around like Mace and Obi-Wan and stuff like that, and then he lets his guard down like around Padme. I think once you see that, you can't unsee it. It's like
Yeah.
it's very intentional. So like I wanted to like ground that in Anakin's inner monologue, and then you see him start to loosen up as he starts to feel vulnerable, like around Mill, and then gradually around Obi-Wan. It really comes to that realization that like when he doesn't have to treat Obi-Wan as his master anymore, and that they are better as a team. That's like the big shift, and then it starts to just like their bickering becomes sparring among friends.
Yeah, it's more banter than bickering.
Yeah.
And I do think, just by the way, my comfort movie might be Attack of the Clones, because at least right now it is. It's just it's just fun. You know, it's just a lot of fun. And I loved also the way you kind of, I don't want to say poke fun at, but you highlight and kind of express reasons for different things that happened in Attack of the Clones, especially like Padme and Anakin's relationship, where he says, how did it say it? I apologize. It was.
I know what you're talking about. It's like when like he just blurted stupid things out of his mouth.
That's it. That's it.
That was so there. It was very intentional because I mean, like I think back to myself at like 18, 19, and I said all sorts of stupid shit trying to woo women, but then you take the extreme situation of not this is someone that he's been infatuated with because he has like no other exposure to like anyone else, and then also like so he's got no dating experience and no like sort of like normal societal interactions. He's just like this warrior monk guy. So I wanted to like lean into the reality of the moment. So like to have him acknowledge that like yeah that was pretty cringe, but like look at where we got here.
Yes.
And then the sand thing, I mean like the sand thing, like I as a human my entire life have hated sand so much. One of my early memories is going to the beach with some family friends, and I remember it was cold and the sand kept getting in my shoes. I'm probably like 5 or 6 at this point, and I'm like, this is so terrible. Why does anyone like this? And I still feel that way. And my daughter loves sand, loves playing in sand, loves going to the beach, and I'm just like, I hate it so much. If like at the beach, like I am in my jeans and my Doc Martens, and I'm like, screw this. This is the worst thing ever. I like being at the beach like 100 feet away where I can appreciate like the natural beauty of the beach. I hate walking on it so much. So for Anakin, it was really important to like take that line, but then ground it. Okay, what's his reality? Like, why does he hate sand so much? Why would he use it as like a way to talk to Padme in Attack of the Clones? And it's like, wait a minute, sand is probably the thing that he hates the most. He grew up on this like harsh, hot desert world where it's like getting into his machines, getting into his food, getting into his hair and his clothing. So he's trying to tell Padme that like you are nothing like the thing that is the worst thing in the world to me. You are the complete opposite of that. So and then Padme, I wanted to show her recognize it as like economic disparity. So Padme grew up on Naboo, like the prettiest place in the galaxy, with like these ornate, sleek ships and like these huge palaces and stuff. And so for them to recognize that, like, yeah, that was a pretty dumb thing to say, but you're saying it because Anakin is like saying you are like this aspiration away from this hell that I grew up in. And then Padme is saying that like you are feeling this way because it created such difficulty for your childhood and for your life. And you're just so thankful to be away from it. And so when you ground it in that, I think like it's very easy to empathize with both of them in that moment. But it was important for them to like have these moments of like reflection on what they did. I don't know, like, my wife and I, like I'm sure every couple does this. Like once you get past like the awkward stage, like you can joke about the stupid shit you said to each other.
Yes.
So it was very important for them to acknowledge that and not hide from it,
Yeah.
because it's part of the canon. It's in the script.
It
It's in the movie. So let's work with it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes the Clone Wars and the prequels and the books of that era work so well together, because it all, as George Lucas said, it's poetry and it should rhyme.
Mhm.
Those are those repeating couplets that bring you back to who these characters are. Okay, so let's switch back to you and your Star Wars
Sure.
experience.
Yeah.
What is your favorite Star Wars memory?
Ooh, God, there's so many. I think right now, like in the present, the fact that we are watching Rebels as a family, and like that's just really great. Like, a few
Yeah.
times a week we'll put it on and watch 2 or 3 episodes together. And I'm actually kind of sad that like we're near the end. Like as we record this, we are right up against the episode where Kanan dies. And
Oh,
my wife does not know. I think I told her. It's funny because last night, so after this episode airs, after our interview airs, like you can ping me on Twitter and ask how it went.
yeah.
But so last night we watched the episode before that, which is where Hera flies an X-wing, and it's awesome. But then Hera gets captured, and Kanan's like, "I gotta rescue her," and like the Loth Wolves are like, basically telling him like, "This is your moment."
Yeah.
And so I told my wife, I'm like, we should screen the next 2 episodes before we show it to our daughter. And I'm like, something very intense happens, and I go like, you can probably see what's being hinted at. She's like, yeah, I think I know. So like, she has not screened it yet, but it was funny because I think a few months ago when the Ahsoka trailer dropped, and we were watching it, and they're like, oh look, it's Sabine. Oh look, it's Hera. It's Chop. Um, and then my wife goes, I can't wait to see Freddie Prinze Jr. like as live action Kanan, and I just like did not say anything.
Exactly.
So, and then like when we rewatched the trailer, my daughter goes like, "Where are Kanan and Ezra?" And like she missed that Ezra is in there as a hologram. But I said
Yeah.
like, "Oh, it's just a trailer. They don't show you who's in like everything just yet, But like, it's like it's gonna hit pretty hard. Like I remember like when Padme died, and when my daughter watched Revenge of the Sith the first time, she was 6, and she was just completely destroyed. And I think like she's probably matured, in terms of like how she can handle storytelling, and she's seeing
Yeah.
more character death in there. And I told my wife like what's really good about Rebels is like the thing happens at the end of the next episode, and then they take like an episode to actually emotionally deal with it. So like yeah, hit me up on Twitter for or Blue Sky, where I'm kind of at right now too. But I will let people know how that goes. But
Yeah.
yeah, that is a favorite memory.
What are the top 3 elements that make Star Wars to you? Like, what does
Hmm.
any Star Wars product have to?
It's interesting. I think about this a lot because I watch a lot of Star Trek too, and it's like, what are like the disparities behind that? And I feel like Star Wars always kind of has to have like the more junky lived-in universe as opposed to like the sleeker military vessels of Star Trek.
Yep.
There has to be some acknowledgement of mysticism. Like it doesn't have to be explicit. Like Andor and Rogue One, like, well, I guess Rogue One has Chirrut, but like Andor totally works. But like it's it has to acknowledge that like that is an element of it in there. But like so I guess the fusion of science fiction and fantasy is really
Yeah.
important.
Yes.
I know people always say like, there's hope in Star Wars, but I also feel like Star Wars is at its best when that hope is kind of conjoined with desperation. And
Uh-huh.
like I think that's why like my favorite Star Wars media, like I think about like that's sort of like you're racing against something that's like trying to catch up to you. So like in Revenge of the Sith, obviously it does catch up to them. But Empire, it does that. Like Rogue One, it does that. The Last Jedi, it does that.
Yeah.
I enjoy that aspect of it. Like what will we do to keep hope alive, sort of sprinting more than like the popcorn, I guess, fun of like, A New Hope
Yes.
or The Force
Yes.
Awakens.
Excellent. I love that idea of hope intermingled with desperation, because it is so true that
I think it makes for the most compelling storytelling because it's like
Yeah.
when your external factor is, I mean, this gets into like writing shop talk. Like when like your internal drive is being chased by like your external factor, like that's when like things really like peak and the story really hits on all of its beats. And it's something like when I'm crafting an outline, like I try to identify the moment that that's going to happen. But like for me, like peak Star Wars is feeling that like we are running out of road, but we're holding on to hope because we have to, because we are
Yeah.
carrying the flag for hope. And then in Revenge of the Sith, you know, it just runs out and everyone gets
Yeah. It's just... Now, you've attained one pie in the sky dream by writing a prequel Star Wars book.
Mhm.
What is your next pie in the sky Star Wars dream?
Being allowed to write another one.
Yeah.
That's basically it. I don't know. I tell people like, well, for one thing, like you're not allowed to pitch Lucasfilm. Like
Yeah.
they actually, like if you pitch them, like they will just like basically delete it right away because they can't let it, like legally, like they can't let an
Yes.
outside influence them. Like uh, I would love to write Obi-Wan and Satine. I know E.K. Johnston would also really like to write that, and Kirsten White would also really like to write that, and they're both friends. Like Kirsten White and I talk about like parenting, and she plays Pokemon Go with my daughter. So I'm like, if you get it, I am so happy for you. But I would like a chance to do that because I think I could do it well. I have been asked, like, could you write a Clone Wars era follow-up to Brotherhood? And without being specific, I know of one moment in Clone Wars that I think I could write a very like emotionally parallel book to Brotherhood. But I won't say what that is because I don't want to.
Yes.
The other thing is like I have expressed this on Twitter, so I think it's okay to say if someone would let me write a Fennec Shand origin story, I would really love to write a Fennec Shand origin story.
That's a good one. That would be awesome.
She's awesome. I love her so much.
Is she one of your favorite characters?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like a big part of it is obviously because it's like Mina Wen, and it's like we don't get
Yeah.
much Asian rep in
Yep.
Star Wars. But also, as someone who like like my favorite video game series is Metal Gear Solid. And, you know, so like the idea of like the stealth, I love Assassin's Creed too. So it's like stealth assassin with a sniper rifle who's a badass bounty hunter and an Asian woman, and it's Mina Wen. You know, it's like
Yes.
everything in there kind of wrapped up in one. Like I love her, like the final assassination scene in Book of Boba Fett, where she's like just running around like the ceiling. It's like, oh, this is like peak Assassin's Creed and Star Wars. So
Yes.
yeah, I would love. I have my head canon of like how I would actually do it, but I can't say it out loud.
No problem. So of all the things that are announced right now, what are you looking forward to the most in the Star Wars galaxy?
God, really like all of it for different reasons.
I love that answer.
Like I'm very curious like what the Acolyte's going to do for world building. I'm a huge Rebels fan, so I'm really looking forward to Ahsoka. What was the new video game? Is it Outlaws? Like
Oh
that
yeah,
one?
Outlaws.
Yeah, like
Yep.
for it to it seems like it's going to basically be Assassin's Creed in Star Wars,
So-
which is freaking amazing because I love Assassin's Creed. And I only half jokingly tweeted at the production team, I'm like, hey, you could put Ruug in this like very,
Yeah.
very easily. She could give out a quest. Like, you know, that could be really awesome. Yeah, like I really look forward to like Daisy Ridley's upcoming movie.
Yes.
So what I like about Star Wars right now is like it's connected, but it's not. Like with Marvel, like sometimes Marvel feels like homework. And that's why like I haven't watched half of the Marvel stuff in the past few years because it's like I don't have time, and like if I don't like the character, then like I'm not gonna sit through this. I appreciate how Star Wars is just kind of like, I mean, Star Trek has done it really, really well over the past few years, where they're like, let's give you something from like different eras, and there is going to be some sort of like overlying continuity, but like you don't have to religiously watch one to enjoy the other. And I really
Yes.
appreciate that about Star Wars right now.
Now, before I ask my last question, I just want to see, do you want to pull one of Kelly's cards? Conversation
sure, yeah.
started, and we'll just do one.
Yeah. Okay. Give me a number between 1 and 125.
37.
37. Okay, so 37. Okay, choose an animal on our planet to model a Star Wars species after. What animal did you pick, and what would the species look like? Oh, this is perfect because this ties back into my book. So, on the floor of Cato Nemoidia are the giant corgi beasts.
That's right, yes.
And the corgi beasts are modeled after my wonderful corgi, my late corgi who passed in 2018, Lola. So I often joke like, don't tell the other dogs that I have owned, don't tell them this, but Lola was like my special dog. And so like she has a trilogy of books now. She has Brotherhood with the corgi beasts. She has Vampire Weekend, where Louise the vampire's only friend is her corgi Lola.
Oh,
And then in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the Dog of War, the whole plot centers around Quark gets a corgi and other contraband, and shenanigans happen. So giant corgi beasts of Cato Nemoidia are like literally giant space corgis. I'm still kind of shocked that they let me do this. So they're corgis that are about the size of a hippo. So,
uh-huh.
and just like real corgis, when they are hungry, they are very food driven. So they kind of become insane. And also they shed everywhere. And so like that's how you can track them. Or in our case, like that's how we could figure out that like Lola snuck into the cat room and stole all the cat food because there's like corgi fur everywhere. So that's a very real world. Like it's the corgi owners who have read that book. They're like, oh my god, this is exactly what a corgi does.
This is a corgi right here.
And there's a moment in Brotherhood because I love Ventress as a character, and Ventress has a lot of dimension. She's coming from a place of like basic, kind of similar to Anakin, like coming from like an abused or like an isolated background, but then like having the Sith abuse her at this point. So she's like, she has no real redeeming qualities at this point in her life, but there's a moment where when the corgi beast is a little bit injured and she puts her hand on the corgi's nose and says like, I understand it, you know, what it's doing, like its will to survive.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I wanted to give Ventress in screenwriting and storytelling, it's called a save the cat moment, where it's
Yep.
like, you know, you save the cat and you humanize your character. So I wanted to give Ventress that, but I love the image of like Asajj Ventress like basically petting a giant corgi on the nose.
That would be some good fan art right there.
Yes, yes. If anyone
I
out there
can
wants
see
to draw me Asajj Ventress and a giant space corgi, please do it.
Awesome. And those are the Star Wars conversation cards that hopefully will be out, I think, the beginning of August.
I believe it's
Last-
yeah, first or second week of August by Kelly Knox, our wonderful friend.
And finally, you go to Skywalker Ranch, and there at the gates, George Lucas greets you. What do you say to him?
Ooh. You know, it's funny because like I remember in like the early days of social media, like there's like, you know, questions going around like who would you want, like what celebrities would you want to have dinner with? And
Yeah.
one of my picks was always George Lucas. I think back to like there's an interview with Natalie Portman like when they were making the prequels, and she said like one of her favorite things to do is just sit down and talk to George, and not about Star Wars, but because she's like history and politics and art and filmmaking, and he's just like super into talking about that kind of stuff. And I think like I would ask George if we could get a cup of coffee and then just see where the conversation goes from there, because like in the current political state of our world and of filmmaking and art, I think he would have a lot to say, and I would just listen to everything that he said. Like there's no canon questions I would ask him. I don't think like I would ask him if he could please read my book and ask me ask him what he thinks of it. But other than that, I would just want to talk about current events with George Lucas.
That's amazing. That's a good answer. I like it.
I mean, like if I could speak, like I'd probably be too like dumbstruck to speak. But
Yes.
but other than that, yes, I that's what I would be really curious to just like, you know, see what goes on in his brain for like 2 hours.
Yeah, and see what he thinks of the world around him. I mean, we kind of know what he thinks about Star Wars. We live it every day.
Yeah, exactly. I know there was, I think it was Garrett Edwards who said that like when George screened Rogue One, like they had a phone call for like an hour, and he's like, I won't tell you what he said, but it was like the best conversation of my life. So I kind of want something like that.
Yeah. Well, Mike, thank you so much for sharing with me what Star Wars means to you. Where can people find you?
So on if Twitter has not collapsed by the time that this goes up, I'm on Twitter at Mike Chen Writer. I'm like on Blue Sky at Mike Chen Writer. Like I'm trying to claim that handle at every social media platform, but I am, as of now, still pretty fairly active on Blue Sky because I'm actually really enjoying it. I am on Instagram at Mike Chen Writer, and I don't really update much because I feel very confused by that platform. My website is mikechenbooks.com, and I really need to update that because that's like 6 months outdated. So those are the best places that you can find me. So on Twitter or Blue Sky, feel free to ask me Star Wars questions, and if I am legally allowed to tell you, I will talk about it.
And you're also writing a Deep Space Nine comic book right now, is that correct?
Yeah, so it's a 5-issue miniseries. Issue 4 just came out, so the final issue comes out in August. So that is Deep Space Nine, the Dog of War. So Quark gets some contraband. One of it is a corgi, and another piece of that is a mysterious Borg device. They let me play with like Cisco's PTSD of the Borg while telling a story of how like the crew like really falls in love with this dog. And it takes place in season 6. If you are a hardcore Deep Space Nine fan, it takes place right after the episode His Way. So they've recently taken back the station from the Cardassians, and everything's kind of like falling apart, and the war is not going well. And this series like does touch on that pretty deeply. And like they told me to treat it like I am writing a lost episode of Deep Space Nine. So so far everyone's really happy with it. Like fan feedback is really, really good. And like with Brotherhood, people said that it sounds like the characters, and to me that's like the most important thing. So
Yeah.
if you love Deep Space Nine, I threw everything I love about Deep Space Nine into that mini series because I figured like I may not get a chance to do this again. So everyone gets a moment to shine in there.
That's great. And coincidentally, I'm doing a Deep Space Nine rewatch right now.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so after you get to season 6, like in the middle of season 6, just pause it and then read this mini series.
I will. It'll be a lot of fun. Mike, thank you so much again. Looking forward to your next book. Do you have a next book?
So the Return of the Jedi from a Certain Point of View anthology that comes out at the end of August.
Yeah.
And I'm still kind of amazed that like they trust me with Anakin Skywalker so much. So like my story is I believe it's the final one in the book, but it is about the return of Anakin's Force Ghost. So that comes out, and then in January I have a time loop novel called A Quantum Love Story, and that's my next book. And then the book after that is the just announced Marvel book. It's a novel. It's not a comic book. It's what if Moon Knight was host to Venom, and it's part of a 5-book series of like what ifs that are interconnected in a way that I can't tell you right now because that would be a spoiler.
Okay, fair enough. But that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's really fun writing it. I Google a lot of pictures of Oscar Isaac, so it's a good job.
Yeah. Well, look out for that. I can understand why they are happy with you handling Anakin. I think you did a great job with Brotherhood. I look forward to reading about the return of his Force Ghost in the Return of the Jedi point of view, a certain point of view anthology. And thanks again, Mike. The Force will be with you always.
Thank you. And everyone pick up Kelly Knox's conversation cards in like 6 weeks.
Yes, definitely. I think I'm just going to start incorporating them into the show.
There you go. Have them pick a number.
So that's what Star Wars means to Mike Chen. You can find him on most social sites at Mike Chen Writer. And all his links are in the podcast notes as well, including a link to his Nerdist article and, of course, a link to Kelly Knox's awesome Star Wars conversation cards. Do you have a comfort watch Star Wars that isn't necessarily your favorite Star Wars movie? Have you read Star Wars Brotherhood? And what Star Wars story or era would you like to see Mike Chen take on next? Get in on the conversation on Twitter or Instagram at Star Wars Mean to You. That's at Star Wars Mean, the number 2 and the letter U. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. If you're liking the show, please give us a 5-star rating and review. And remember, the Force will be with you, always. Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners, and that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.